So let's talk about environmental toxins, mold, man-made chemicals, and heavy metals, because all of these things have an impact on your ability to heal and repair from a chronic Lyme or chronic co-infection case. And so one of the things that I would say, first of all, is that if you get treated, you're feeling better and things are going well, I mean, there's no point in digging into some of this stuff. What we're talking about today is really talking about those patients that just never recovered, the ones that never felt like they dug out of the hole, and to kind of do a complete thorough job of your case. I mean, what needs to be done is you need to test for all those co-infections that we talked about in a prior um, video, but you need to also look at any of the potential burdens that might be on your system. So this would include exposures to heavy metals, exposures to chemicals, and exposures to mold. Those are the most common ones that kind of sabotage the immune system. Now we'll start off with mold, because mold toxicity is a really interesting clinical picture, because mold toxicity can mimic so many other diseases. I would say that 90% of Lyme disease symptoms are also mold symptoms. And so most people don't realize that quite often the molds can look like Lyme, and that's why their tests are coming back negative. So why do people not realize they have mold exposure? So mold is an interesting thing, because I mean, when you think about humanity, we were never meant to live in little wet wooden boxes. In the history of this planet, we lived in, places that were very drafty, that had a lot of airflow through them, whether they were caves or whether they were grass huts or whether they were shelters, log cabins out in the woods, or even kind of brick and stone castles, in medieval Europe. They always had air flowing through them. Nowadays, what we do is we seal up these boxes, we wrap it in plastic, we put plastic siding on it, and then we say, okay, we're doing this for the environment. We're doing it to save money on our heating and electricity bills. But what it actually does is it creates the perfect environment for moisture to be captured. And because our building materials nowadays are not what we would consider to be the most natural, so, synthetic carpets made out of petroleum products. We're talking about gyprock or drywall, which mold can grow in and loves growing in. The building materials that we use in terms of wood, we're using soft pine. Pine molds very easily, whereas some of the houses that were built, 100 years ago, they were built using fir. And fir is a much more dense wood, and it's also very resistant to mold. And so it's partly a consequence of the materials that we're using in our building, but also just a consequence of us spending more time indoors. And so in modern society, we spend a lot of time on our computers, our phones, we in office spaces that we're working in, or in our home when we go home and we watch TV at night. Now, most people say, well, I don't have any mold. I don't see any mold in my house. And that's quite often the case, is you don't actually see it. It could be living in the ducts of your HVAC system or your heating system in your house, or your air conditioning system. It can be living in the walls. It can be living behind your headboard of your bed. It can be behind the toilet or in the bathroom. And usually by the time you see it, it's way too late. Um, I remember when I took mycology courses in university, and they would say that, when you have mold growing on cheese, a lot of people would just cut that little bit of mold off. But that's only about a third, if not only 20% of the actual mold. The mycelium of that mold is growing in about 60% more. So you have to cut that cheese way deeper to get rid of all the mold. And so that's what we see in homes too, is that by the time you see it, there's way more there than you even knew about. And quite often it's almost too late at that point. And by too late, I mean too late to really turn around your health without doing some major remediation or moving, which is the other option that a lot of people choose to do. Now, how do you get rid of mold toxins, or why can't you get rid of mold toxins? So there's a number of different ones, And there's ones like gliotoxin, which is black mold. A lot of people are familiar with kind of the black mold and how toxic it is, but there are a number of other ones, aspergillus species that can live in carpet, that can live in curtains, that can live in the carpets of your car. There's a lot of different mold that can create toxic compounds that'll be released into the air that you inhale. And then there's things like ochratoxins, which are found on grains, legumes, beans. And when we look at exposures to ochratoxins, this is cumulative, meaning that, the mold can suppress immune system function or lead to immune dysregulation, which doesn't allow you to recover from the Lyme disease or the co-infections that we're talking about. And so, one of the big kind of exposures for ochratoxins is coffee. Coffee beans have a ton of mold on them traditionally because they're just left out to dry in the sun. And so you'll get a lot of kind of naturally occurring mold. And so everybody has, their 2 cups a day. And that will be potentially enough to kind of build up in the system over time. Now, the question I always get is from patients is, well, why is my spouse or why is my partner or why are my kids fine and I'm not? We know that there's genetic individuality within the population, meaning that, some people can drink a pot of coffee before bed and go to sleep, and others can't have a cup of coffee after 10 a.m. or else they can't sleep. And so this is an example of kind of genetic individuality in terms of their detox mechanisms. And so people that have kind of slow detox mechanisms will typically accumulate. Okay. And when people are sick or stressed out, they will accumulate more because the liver is busy doing other stuff. And so you can get exposed to what we consider to be normal amounts, but over a period of 10, 20, or 30 years, build it up to the point where it actually suppresses your immune system. And so that's what's really, really key about mold toxicity is just understanding that it can be historical. This can be exposure that you had as a child that built up in the system over time, or had a mass exposure and for some reason your body was young and it was youthful and it was able to kind of resist the poison. But as you age and your detox mechanisms and stress and the burdens of life get heavier, then all of a sudden the mold becomes too much to bear. And so it's possible to have it from a long time ago. It's possible also to have a short exposure. Say you go on a tropical vacation and stay in a hotel room where there is a musty, damp smell and there's mold in the ducts, and you sleep there for a week. You can get a massive exposure in a short period of time. And if you're a poor detoxifier, then it's just going to build up in the system. And so that's why it's really, really important just to not say, well, I don't have black mold or I've never been exposed to, so how can it be that? The only way to know is to do a proper test. And it's usually a urine test. You wake up in the morning, you pee in a cup first thing, and then you get your results back a few weeks later and see what's coming out of you. Now, the same kind of conversation goes for heavy metals. A lot of people go, well, how was I exposed to that? Well, we know a number of, products, even in recent history, have been recalled. And then we're talking about natural health products and companies that hold themselves out to be natural health products. Ingredients like lip balm containing lead. Why would lip balm contain lead? Well, we have no idea, but they're manufactured in other countries that maybe have different standards for contamination or no standards. And so it's really important to recognize that, something as benign as lip balm or lipstick or eyeliner or some other cosmetics or soaps or shampoos that are contaminated and they're on your body and they're on your skin is actually somewhat permeable. And certain skin is way more permeable. So obviously, if you're putting things on your lips and then you have a drink of your tea, you could be swallowing this stuff on a regular basis. You put it on your eyelids, which is a very permeable skin as well. That can also expose you to more. And then there's the generation that, are, 60, 70, or even 50 years old. Some of the 40-year-olds, we grew up in a time when there was leaded gas, when there was lead paint in the cars, where a lot of our, industrial chemicals were just not held to the same standards. And so we were exposed to gasoline fumes potentially at a job as a kid, or maybe our parents were cigarette smokers. And in those days, they were allowed to smoke in the car or in homes or in restaurants. And so this would have been an exposure of cadmium or potentially lead. And so that can lead to these kind of burdens building up within you. And again, typically we would do a provoked urine test to test whether or not you have heavy metals. within your system, and it's a non-invasive, relatively inexpensive test compared to like Lyme disease testing, and that's something you can do as well. So mold testing and heavy metal testing is typically urine tests. Now with the heavy metals, because lead, when your body's exposed to poisons and it doesn't know how to deal with it, it'll put it into what we call metabolically inactive tissues, right? So tissues where it won't hurt the body as much if it stores it there, if it can't get rid of it. So lead is typically harbored or put into bone. So you'll see white blood cell, red blood cell abnormalities. You'll see, again, immune system dysfunction, or even kind of accelerated cases of osteoporosis. You'll see that with lead toxicity. With mercury toxicity, it's fat soluble. So it typically gets deposited into fat, and we're talking about fat anywhere in the body, but the brain is also, the majority of the brain is fat. And so mercury has an affinity for getting deposited in its brain tissue as well. Things like aluminum, cadmium, etc., they all get deposited in various tissues. And so it's really important that you do test for those heavy metals just to make sure that you don't have that burden, and you're not giving the body a reason why it can't heal from Lyme disease. And the last thing is man-made chemicals. Like, a lot of us don't realize how many chemicals we're exposed to in day-to-day life, right? Like, for example, hand sanitizer. In the last 3 years since COVID-19, there are hand sanitizers that we know have known benzene in them. So benzyl alcohols and things like this. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't use hand sanitizer. I'm just saying you should make sure you use hand sanitizers that are clean and safe, that don't contain chemicals. But that's just an example of an everyday product, like shampoo and conditioners, that contain all these man-made chemicals that we have no idea what the kind of consequences of using all of them in concert are. Like, we know that those ingredients have been tested in animals and in humans and say, okay, that ingredient seems safe as long as they get below a certain amount. But what happens when you add up 300 or 400 chemicals between shampoos, moisturizers, food additives, et cetera, into one giant soup, and you say, okay, what is the consequence of all of that? I mean, there is no clinical study out there or any research to say that that's safe in any way, adding all of those things together in a human being. Likely it is in most people, but there are individuals that just can't seem to get rid of these things or don't have good detox capabilities. And these chemicals can build up in the system. And again, you can get tested for this. There are a number of really good labs around the country. The United States has a lot of great labs when it comes to this stuff. And it's basically wake up in the morning, pee in a cup, see what's coming out of you. And if there are these chemicals, then how do we help your body, support detox, whether it's through the skin, whether it's through the kidneys, whether it's through the liver. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of encourage and support the body to help detoxify these kind of environmental pollutants. So if you want to learn more about environmental toxicity, chemicals, mold, etc., please subscribe to the channel. Please leave comments. I appreciate all of this stuff, and I'll talk about topics that you have an interest in. But as you know, there's so much to know about Lyme disease, co-infections, and all of the complexities of these chronic conditions. And so we're gonna build on this library of information, and we're gonna do this to help as many people as we can. So again, click to subscribe and stay tuned for further videos.